Welcome to this data analytics tutorial covering budgeting and performance evaluation using Excel pivot tables and charts. In this activity, we are using the real-life checkbook data from the City of Somerville, Massachusetts for 2013 to 2016. For this tutorial only, we are using a small 22 record dataset. For the actual activity, you will be using the full dataset, so your answers for the activity requirements will be different, but the process will be similar. For this tutorial on pivot tables and pivot charts, we will be demonstrating using Office 365 Excel for Windows. Other versions of Excel may be slightly different. Also note that there may be many ways of accomplishing the same thing. We are just presenting one way here. Start this activity by opening the Excel workbook containing the data set. In general, for each of the requirements in this activity, create a new pivot table in a new worksheet. Name each new worksheet as Rec 1, Rec 2, etc. Format the dollar amounts in each pivot table or pivot chart using the accounting format with 0 decimal places. Format non-currency numbers in each pivot table or pivot chart using the number format with 0 decimal places, unless instructed otherwise. Requirement 1 asks, from 2013 to 2016, what was the total spending in each of the 4 calendar years? The first step is to click anywhere in the data worksheet. Step 2 is to click on the Insert tab. Step 3 is to click on Pivot Table to insert a pivot table. Excel will present you with a box containing pivot table options. Accept the defaults and click on OK. Before we go any further, for Step 5, right-click the Worksheet Name tab and rename it Rec 1. That will just help to keep track of our pivot tables. For Step 6, drag Check Date in the Pivot Table Fields panel down to the column box. It will expand to include years, quarters, and check date. Once I did this, I dragged quarters and check date out of the column box to leave only years. I still have quarters and check date displayed on this slide, but drag each of them up to the field box to remove them from the columns box. Those 2 fields will be gone on the next slide. Notice that the column labels for the years 2013 through 2016 now appear in the pivot table, and that quarters and check dates are no longer in the column box because we dragged them up to the field box. By the way, if the Pivot Table Fields panel ever disappears, you can bring it back by clicking anywhere in the pivot table you have created. For Step 7, drag the Amount field from the Pivot Table Fields panel down to the Values box. By the way, watch to make sure that the field in the Values box says Sum of. If it says Count of, then you need to change it to Sum. To change the amounts in the pivot table to be the sum rather than the count, click on Count of in the Pivot Table Fields panel, select Value Field Settings, and then select Sum and click OK. Watch in future pivot tables that you are getting sum rather than count, and fix it just like here if you need to change it. Getting a count rather than a sum is a result of having at least one blank in your data set. Now the pivot table has the sums of the transactions' dollar amounts. In Step 8, we are going to format the data. Select the amounts in the pivot table and right-click to select Value Field Settings. In Step 9, click on Number Format. In Step 10, select the accounting format with 0 decimal places and click OK. That's it for Requirement 1. We can see the spending for Somerville for each of the 4 years in the data set. Requirement 2 asks the question, in each of the years 2013 to 2016, how much was spent in each of the 3 categories of government: education, General Government, and Public Works. The first step is to click anywhere in the data worksheet. For step 2, to insert a pivot table, click Insert, then Insert Pivot Table, and then click OK. For step 3, right-click the worksheet name to rename it as Rec 2. In step 4, drag Category of Gov in the Pivot Table Fields panel down to the Rows box, Amount down to the Values box, and Years down to the Columns box. Remember to check, is the Values field sum of or count of? To change the amounts in the pivot table to be the sum rather than the count, click on Count Of in the Pivot Table Fields panel, select Value Field Settings, and then select Sum and click OK. Watch in future pivot tables that you are getting sum rather than count and fix it just like here if you need to change it. For step 5, select the amounts in the pivot table and right-click. For step 6, click on Value Field Settings. For step 7, click on Number Format. For step 8, select Accounting Format and 0 decimal places and then click OK. That's it. We can see what was spent in each category of government for Somerville for each of the 4 years in the data set. Requirement 3 reads, how much in expenditures did Somerville have in each item class in the general government category for each of the years 2013 to 2016? The first step is to click anywhere in the data worksheet. For step 2, to insert a pivot table, click Insert, then Insert Pivot Table, and then click OK. For step 3, drag Category of Gov in the Pivot Table Fields panel down to the Filters box, Years down to the Columns box, Item Class down to the Rows box, and Amount down to the Values box. Remember to check, is the Values field sum of or count of? To change the amounts in the pivot table to be the sum of rather than the count, click on Count Of in Pivot Table Settings panel, select Value Field Settings, and then select Sum and click OK. For step 4, in the filter area in the pivot table itself, click on the drop-down arrow and select General Government and then click OK. For step 5, right-click the worksheet name and rename it Rec 3. For step 6, select the amounts in pivot table and right-click, click on Value Field Settings, click on Number Format, select Accounting Format in 0 decimal places, and click OK. That's it. We can see what was spent in each item class by the General Government category for each of the 4 years in the data set. Requirement 4 reads, using the budget worksheet included in the Excel data file, prepare a budget variance report that compares actual spending by item class in 2016 for the general government category. Use cell references for the actual spending totals. Use conditional formatting. Use the shapes 3 sign style to denote the direction of the percentage variances. For the first step in Requirement 4, click on the Budget worksheet. In Step 3, click in the cell in the first row of expenditures under the Actual column and tap the equal sign. For Step 3, with your mouse, click on the Requirement 3 worksheet and then click on the first line item in the 2016 column. Here in this mini data set, it is the miscellaneous line item, and then press Enter. Once you click Enter, you are returned to the budget worksheet and you will see that the first item now has a dollar amount. Notice the formula bar has the reference to the cell in the pivot table from Requirement 3. Remember to use cell references that point to the data from the pivot table from requirement 3. Do not simply type in the numbers. In step 4, repeat the process of pointing to each cell for each expenditure listed in the pivot table. Note, you cannot copy cell references to a pivot table. You must go through the process of pointing to each pivot table cell individually. In step 5, sum the actual expenditures column by clicking in the total expenditures cell under the actual column, column C, and then click on AutoSum in the ribbon. For step 6, enter the formula to calculate the variance in dollars, which is the budget total less the actual total. For the first one, you will type equals, then click in cell B6, then type minus, then click in cell C6, and then hit the Enter key. For step 7, enter the formulas to calculate the dollar variances for the rest of the expenditure items, including the total. You can also copy and paste if you wish, since these formulas do not refer directly to a pivot table cell. For step 8, enter the formula to calculate the variance in percentage, which is the variance dollars divided by the budget amount for that same row. For the first one, you will type equals, then point to cell D6, then type slash, then point to cell B6, and then hit the Enter key. For step 9, enter the formulas to calculate the percentage variances for the rest of the expenditure items, including the total row. You can also copy and paste if you wish, since these formulas do not refer directly to a pivot table cell. For step 10, select the dollar fields in the budget, right-click, select Format Cells, and then select Accounting with 0 decimal places. Click OK. For step 11, select the percentage fields in the budget, right-click, select Format Cells, and then select Percentage with 2 decimal places. Click OK. In step 12, select the total cells, and then in the Format Options menu in the ribbon for those selected cells, select Top and Double Bottom Border. For step 13, select the cells in row 1 across the top of the budget report. Click on the Merge and Center button in the ribbon. Repeat the merge and center process for the other 2 title headings. For step 14, we are now going to tackle the issue of displaying icons to denote the amount of the variance percentages. In cell F6, enter the formula absolute E6, which is at ABS paren E6 end paren, which gives the absolute value of the variance percentage. Copy cell F6 to each of the rows below it, including the total expenditures row. For step 15, select those cells for which you just created the formulas. Here I am selecting cells F6 to F8. Once you have selected those cells, click on Conditional Formatting in the ribbon. Next, under Conditional Formatting, click on Icon Sets and then Shapes 3 signs. With those same cells selected, click on Conditional Formatting in the ribbon again, and now click on Manage Rules. Click on Edit Rule. For this step, make the following edits to the rule. Click on Reverse Icon Order. Place a check mark in Show Icons Only. Next to the red diamond shape, select Number for Type and enter the value 0.10. Next to the yellow triangle shape, select Number for Type and enter the value 0.03. Click on OK when finished. Next, select Apply and then OK. That's it. We can see the variances in dollars and percentages between budget and actual for each item class expenditure for the general government category for 2016 with some visual data formatting. Note, the budget and actual columns are oftentimes listed with actual first followed by budget second. It is a matter of preference. What is important is to be able to interpret the variances and what they mean. Requirement 5 reads, analyze the budget variance report you prepared in step 4. What variances do you think should be investigated? Why? When answering these questions, think about 2 ways to analyze variances, which are by dollar amount and by percentage. That concludes this data analytics tutorial covering budgeting and performance evaluation using Excel pivot tables and charts. Thanks for watching.